lonely rich rancher, saw her fixing his fence in the rain, then realized she'd been homeless all along. Wyoming Territory, late 1880. Rain fell steadily across the wide stretch of prairie, drenching everything in its path: fences, earth, trees, and one lone figure kneeling at the edge of the Northwood property. Calder Northwood pulled his coat tighter as he rode back from town, his horse's hooves muffled in the sodden ground. The wind cut across the land, cold and unforgiving. But even through the mist and gray, his eyes locked on the strange sight ahead. A woman, young, slim, drenched to the bone. She was crouched beside the old split-rail fence that marked the eastern edge of his land, hammering nails into a sagging rail with a borrowed rock. The hem of her skirt was torn and muddy. Her hands were bare, red from the cold. Her hair, dark auburn, tangled, hung heavy across her face as the rain poured down. But she wasn't stealing. She wasn't vandalizing. She was repairing. Calder dismounted, his boots sinking slightly in the mud. He approached with the caution of a man who'd learned not to trust too easily. "You know this is private land?" he said. The woman didn't look startled. She just glanced up, eyes sharp and unafraid. "I figured," she said, returning her gaze to the rail. "But your fence was falling. I hate seeing things left broken." Her voice was low, steady, not apologetic, not defensive. Calder studied her for a beat. "What's your name?" "Sadie," she answered, still not looking at him. "Sadie what?" She drove another nail, then stood. Her dress clung to her legs, soaked clear through. "Just Sadie." "You fix fences for free, Sadie?" Calder asked. "I fix what's broken," she said, "even if it doesn't belong to me." He stared at her a moment longer, watching the way she stood, calm but wary, like a stray animal used to being chased off. Her boots were too thin for this weather, her coat threadbare. No pack. No horse. No one waiting for her. "You got somewhere to go?" he asked finally. She hesitated, then gave a small, dry smile. "I used to. Now I fix other people's fences." That answer landed harder than any plea might have. Calder reached into his coat, pulled out the dry bundle he always kept there for emergencies, a spare flannel shirt, and an old wool jacket. He offered it silently. Sadie took it, slowly, and wrapped herself without thanks. "You'll freeze out here," Calder said. "There's a fire going inside. Come in, warm up. But just for the night, you leave in the morning." She looked at him long and hard, as if measuring whether he meant what he said, or if there was a catch. Finally she nodded. "Fair enough." They walked side by side toward the main house, the rain still falling, the wind still bitter. Calder glanced down once more at her soaked figure and the quiet strength in her step. He didn't know who she was, didn't know what she was running from. But he knew one thing for certain. That fence hadn't mattered to anyone for months, until someone like her came along and couldn't stand to see it broken. The wind had calmed by the time night settled over the Northwood ranch, but the rain hadn't stopped. It drummed a steady rhythm against the tin roof and the stone walls of the old house that had seen decades of Wyoming winters. Inside, the fire in the hearth cracked low and steady, casting long shadows on the wooden floor. Sadie sat close to the warmth, wrapped in the dry wool blanket Calder had handed her. Her wet boots had been left near the door, and Calder had placed a pair of dry socks and worn house slippers nearby without saying a word. She hadn't touched them. Instead, she curled her legs up beneath her, quiet as a stray cat unsure if it was welcome. Calder kept to the far side of the room. He nursed a mug of black coffee at the table, watching her through the steam, not speaking. The only sounds were the fire and the occasional creak of the old beams settling. He noticed she hadn't glanced around, hadn't asked for anything, hadn't even looked toward the back of the house. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. "Thank you, for not asking too many questions." Calder sipped his coffee. "People ask because they want something. I don't." Sadie didn't reply. She shifted, letting her head rest against the side of the stone hearth, eyes already heavy. Calder stayed where he was, arms crossed, eyes half closed, not sleeping, only watching. When he woke before dawn, the fire had gone cold. Sadie was gone. He rose sharply, pulling on his coat and boots. But before he could open the door, he saw her through the front window. She was outside, sleeves rolled up, her hands tightening a wooden post where the fence had sagged further in the night. She moved with purpose, not looking back. Later that morning he came out with coffee and a biscuit in each hand. She was cleaning out the fireplace when he entered. "I thought I said you'd be gone by morning," he said. Sadie stood, brushing ash off her skirt. "I figured I'd settle my dues first." Calder frowned. "What dues?" "For the roof, for the fire, for the dry socks I didn't wear." She gave him a tired half smile. "Work for a place to sleep. Seems fair." He handed her the coffee. She took it, her hands warming around the mug. "You always fix fences that don't belong to you?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately. Then, "If I walk past something broken and ignore it, what does that make me?" Calder studied her. "You're not what I expected." Sadie met his eyes. "Neither are you." He didn't answer. Instead, he turned back toward the kitchen. She followed, placing her mug down gently before moving to the sink and scrubbing it clean, as if she'd lived there 100 days already. Her movements were quiet but deliberate, and her presence didn't disrupt the stillness of the house. It settled into it. That afternoon, Calder walked the perimeter and saw the fence she'd repaired. 2 full sections braced and reinforced better than his ranch hand had done weeks ago. When he returned, Sadie was brushing one of the mares by the stable, speaking softly to it like she'd known horses all her life. "Where'd you learn to do that?" he asked. "My mother," she said, not turning around. "She trained rescue horses. Before everything changed." Calder didn't ask what everything meant. He only nodded once and said, "You can stay. A few days. Work for food. But I don't keep strays long." "I'm not asking for charity," she said. "I know," he replied, already walking back toward the house. That night, Sadie folded the blanket without being asked. She washed the cups and cleared the ashtray before curling again by the hearth. Calder passed her once, pausing to glance down. She had picked up a small silver frame from the mantel, the photo of his wife, long since gone. Sadie stared at it a moment, then gently placed it back exactly where it had been. She didn't ask about the woman in the picture. Calder stood there for a long time after she'd fallen asleep, watching the fire reflect in the glass of that photo. Something tightened in his chest, unspoken and unwelcome. But he didn't say a word. Not yet. By the end of the first week, Sadie had fallen into the rhythm of the ranch. She rose before the sun, moving quietly through the stone house to start the fire and boil water. She mucked the stalls before Calder even finished his first cup of coffee, never needing instruction, never asking for praise. The horses grew used to her presence. One of the wild colts even let her touch his nose without flinching. She chopped wood, tended the garden, mended torn canvas covers, all without being asked. Calder noticed, but he didn't say much. He watched her instead, from behind his coffee mug or across the field. There was something self-contained about her, like a flame kept under glass, steady, controlled, and maybe a little too careful. One evening, the wind blew sharp from the north. Calder had stayed late in town trading feed, and Sadie had handled the afternoon chores alone. She'd finished everything, almost. In her eagerness, she'd opened the gate to the colt's paddock too early. The horses, still restless with evening energy, had scattered, one of them nearly slipping in the mud. Calder arrived just as she was corralling the last of them back inside. The gate hung crooked on its hinges, and the young horses stomped nervously. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Calder snapped as he dismounted. Sadie turned, mud up her boots, hair loose from its tie. They were pawing at the gate. "I figured—" "You figured wrong," he cut in, voice rising. "They're not dogs. They don't get to roam just because they look bored. One of them could have broken a leg." Sadie's back stiffened. She dropped the halter rope and stepped forward. "I made a mistake," she said, eyes narrowing. But you don't get to talk to me like that." "You're on my land," Calder shot back. "You work under my roof. If that colt had gone lame, I'd be the one paying for it." Her voice was low now, tight with anger. "I work every damn hour, the sun is up. I don't take a thing from you I haven't earned." Calder's expression didn't soften. "Then maybe stop acting like a stray begging for scraps." The silence that followed was louder than a thunderclap. Sadie stared at him, stunned. Then her jaw clenched. She turned on her heel without another word, stomping toward the house. Less than 15 minutes later, Calder saw her slip out the front gate with a sack slung over her shoulder. She didn't look back. The wind howled through the trees, and night fell fast. By the time Calder realized she was truly gone, the stars had vanished behind thick clouds, and the moon was just a haze in the sky. The temperature dropped. He saddled his horse without thinking, heart tight with something he didn't want to name. He found her half an hour later, a mile into the woods, huddled near the roots of a fallen tree. Her boot had snagged between two thick roots, and she was soaked to the skin. Her hands were trembling as she tried to free herself. When she saw him, she didn't speak. Neither did he. Calder dismounted and knelt beside her. He gently pried the leather loose from the roots, then stood and shrugged off his coat. Without a word, he draped it over her shoulders. Her fingers clutched the fabric, grateful and shaking. Still silent, he struck a match and lit a small fire, feeding it with dry twigs from beneath the tree's canopy. He crouched beside it, his back toward the wind, sheltering the flame. Sadie didn't ask why he came. Calder didn't offer an apology. Instead, he sat beside her, close enough for their shoulders to touch, and kept the fire going until her shivers eased. They sat that way a long time, no words, just breath and rain and the low crackle of heat between them. Eventually, her head dropped against his shoulder, and he didn't move. Not even when the wolves howled in the far distance, swallowed quickly by the storm. Sadie stayed. She said nothing about that night in the woods, nor did Calder. But each morning, she was up before the sun, already feeding the horses when he stepped out with his coffee. She moved quieter now, steadier, as though some part of her had settled. She didn't try to talk to him much, and he didn't ask questions. But Calder watched, always watched. She gravitated toward the younger horses, the ones not fully broken, the ones the ranch hands usually avoided. There was something about the way she stood near them, still, breathing deep and slow, that made the animals pause, as if they recognized a kind of silence in her. Then, one morning, she brought out a small wooden whistle. Calder stood by the barn, arms crossed, watching as she pressed the flute to her lips and let out a soft, lilting note. The yearlings perked up. One of them, a jittery roan filly, stepped forward, ears twitching. Sadie whistled again, 2 short tones, then 1 long, and held out her hand. The filly came close, nuzzled her palm. He took a step closer. "Where'd you learn that?" She turned, not startled, but aware. "My mother. She trained cavalry horses before the tracks." Sadie gave a faint nod. She believed music taught trust. Calder glanced at the colt, now dozing under her hand. It seems it still does. Over the next few days, he noticed her spending more time in the paddocks. She taught them to stand while blindfolded, to follow sound instead of sight, and they did. They obeyed her like she spoke their language. But it wasn't until the sorrel stallion bucked his stall one morning that Calder truly saw her. The animal had been trouble since birth, temperamental, easily spooked, and dangerous when cornered. Calder's ex-wife had once tried to tame him but gave up after he nearly shattered her wrist. Since then, the stallion had been left alone, kept fed, but mostly untouched. That morning, as he reared and screamed, most of the ranch hands stayed clear. Calder grabbed a bridle and started toward the pen. But Sadie was already there. She didn't rush in, didn't shout. She stood by the fence, eyes locked with the stallion's wild ones, and began to whistle. Low, slow notes, repeating like a lullaby. The horse snorted, stomped, then took a step forward, then another. Calder froze, bridle slack in his hands. Sadie climbed the fence, sat on the top rail. The stallion's nostrils flared, but he didn't bolt. She kept whistling. Her voice added to the song, soft hums between breaths. Minutes passed. Then, impossibly, the stallion lowered his head. She reached out, touched his muzzle, and he let her. Later that evening, as dusk settled in orange across the field, Calder found her tending to a smaller gelding with a cut near its flank. She crouched in the barn, gently pressing a damp cloth against the wound. He stepped inside. "Need another pair of hands?" She didn't answer, just handed him a clean rag. He knelt beside her. Their knees touched in the hay. She glanced at him but didn't pull away. "Thank you," she said finally. "For what?" "For letting me stay." He shrugged. "You've earned your place." She handed him the cloth again. Their fingers brushed. For a long beat, they both stilled. The silence wasn't awkward. It was warm, waiting. Then, slowly, she looked at him, really looked. Her eyes were softer than before, not guarded, but searching. "You loved her, didn't you?" she asked. Calder didn't need to ask who. "Yes." Sadie nodded, and in that moment, something passed between them. Not confession, not apology, just knowing. The gelding shifted, and she steadied him with a touch to the flank. "People leave," she said. "Animals don't." He watched her hand, her stillness. "Some people stay," he said. Sadie didn't answer, but her hand stayed close to his as they worked. The sun dipped behind the hills, and in the barn, two people knelt beside a wounded creature, quiet, steady, healing something more than flesh. The sun was high and sharp when the stranger rode in. He was lean, mean-eyed, with a long coat dusted from travel and a silver badge glinting beneath his lapel, not a marshal's star, but something older, private. Calder spotted him from the porch and didn't like the way the man looked around, too long, too knowing. "You Northwood?" the man asked, sliding off his horse. "I am." "I'm looking for someone. Might be working here. Girl, mid-20s, brown hair, tough attitude." He smirked. "Answers to Sadie Blake." Calder's gaze didn't flinch. "You law?" "I'm bounty registered," the man said, flashing the badge. "Truancy from a state-sanctioned correctional institute. She's run. That makes her property of the state, or worth $50 to me." Calder's jaw tightened. No one like that here. The man tipped his hat, but his eyes were already scanning past Calder, toward the barn, the pasture beyond, toward Sadie. That night, the ranch was quiet. The horses fed. Sadie was out near the barn, collecting old tack to mend. The wind was rising, and a storm brewed far off the hills. The man appeared from the dark like a shadow, stretching long and hungry. "Well, well," he said, stepping into the light of the lantern Sadie had hung by the barn door. "There you are." "There." Sadie froze. Her hand dropped instinctively to the knife she kept tucked in her boot, but she didn't draw. "Been a long ride," the man said, licking dry lips. "Now, we can make this easy. You come with me, quiet, and maybe I don't tell them you attacked me first. Or—" He stepped closer. "You pay me in other ways. Fair trade for silence." Sadie's voice was flat. "Get off this land. You're not in a position to make demands, sweetheart." She swung the lantern. Glass shattered, flame burst. The man cursed and stumbled back. Then a voice rang out, colder than the wind. "Step back." Calder stood at the edge of the dark, rifle aimed, stance still as death. "Whoa there," the bounty man said, hands raised. "Just doing the law's work. You lay a hand on her?" "She attacked first." "I asked a question. A B tus." The man hesitated. Calder cocked the rifle. "She swung a lantern," he muttered. "That makes you lucky. I'd have shot you where you stood." "I've got rights. She's a human being," Calder said. "And this is private land. You want to take that badge and ride back the way you came, or I bury you under the fence she fixed." The man looked between them. Calder's steady rifle, Sadie's shaking fury and spat to the side. "You'll regret harboring her. She's a liar, a fugitive." Calder didn't blink. "Go." The man mounted and left, but not before muttering a threat Calder didn't care to remember. Sadie didn't move. Her shoulders trembled, not from fear, from rage. Inside the barn, Calder handed her a blanket, but she shook it off. "I'm not cold," she said. "You're shaking." "I said I'm not cold." Calder waited. Then, in a voice cracked and hoarse, she spoke. "My mother died in that place," she whispered. "They said it was suicide. It wasn't. They worked her to death. They called it reform. Said we were women gone wrong. My only crime was being born poor and not bowing when they said kneel." Calder knelt beside her. "I didn't run because I was scared," she said. "I ran because I still wanted to believe I was a person." He looked at her, not pitying, not rescuing, just seeing. "You are," he said. Sadie broke. Not loudly, just a single sob into her hand, like the release of breath held too long. Calder stayed there, beside her, the storm rolling in outside, and for the first time since she stepped foot on his land, she let him sit in her silence. The whispering began as dust on boots and glances over shoulders. By the third day, it had grown teeth. At McCready's general store, a woman in a lavender bonnet leaned over the pickle barrel and said, "I heard she's living under Calder Northwood's roof, a girl from the reformatory." "A reformatory girl? In his house?" murmured the blacksmith's wife. "Lord have mercy." The preacher's assistant folded his arms. "No woman from a correctional institute walks onto a good man's land without trouble following." The gossip swirled like smoke across the town of Elkhorn Bend. Sadie Blake. The name was spoken with raised brows and pinched lips. Calder heard it in pieces. From a cattle trader, from a feed supplier, from the butcher who used to joke with him every week. "You're a good man, Calder," the butcher said, tapping a heavy cleaver against the counter. "Don't ruin it for a woman who doesn't belong." At first, Calder said nothing. He listened. He measured. But when a man he'd known 20 years dropped his voice and said, "It's not too late to send her away quiet, before the town turns on you," something shifted. On Saturday, the market square brimmed with voices and sun. Calder rode in alone, boots hitting the ground heavy, heads turned, eyes followed. He walked to the produce stand run by Mrs. Donnelly, whose daughter had once brought him pie after church. "I hear she's still in your home," Mrs. Donnelly said softly, not unkind. "You must know what people are saying." Calder nodded. He climbed the steps of the town well, turning to face the small crowd that had gathered, not by accident, but by curiosity. "I do," he said. His voice was clear, slow, louder than the wind. "I know what's being whispered. I know the stories passed from porch to pew." People stilled. The sheriff stepped forward but didn't interrupt. "I'll say it once. The woman staying in my home is named Sadie Blake. She is not a criminal. She is not a stray." Someone snorted. Calder's gaze moved to the sound, sharp as a blade. "She works. Harder than most men I've hired. She's never taken a coin she didn't earn, nor a step she wasn't willing to walk alone. And if that offends your pride—" His hand rested on his belt. "Then you've forgotten what decency looks like." There was silence. Then from the side, a voice, fragile and old, cut through. "I saw her once," said Widow Ellison, rising from her seat near the cloth merchant, "picking up fence posts that blew into my yard. Didn't ask for thanks, just nodded and left." People murmured. Calder continued, "She is my ranch hand, and if that ain't enough for you to keep her name out of your mouth." His voice dropped lower, steadier. "Then know this, she's my fiancée." Gasps rippled. "I haven't asked her yet," he added, looking around the stunned circle. "But I will, and if you insult her name, you insult mine." No one spoke, not even the preacher. Later that afternoon, Sadie returned from the hills with a saddlebag full of herbs and wool. She stepped into the house, dirt on her palms, unaware of what Calder had done in town. On the table lay fresh bread, A kettle simmered. She looked around, unsure. Then she saw them. Wildflowers. Not arranged. Just laid gently in a tin can. Purple, yellow, stubborn little blooms from the edge of the field. She stood still, then walked over, slowly, and placed her bundle down beside them. Her fingers brushed the petals. Calder wasn't home yet. But when he returned, there was a pie crust resting on the windowsill, and beside it, a note, written in a careful hand. "Thank you for seeing me." And underneath, just one word. Sadie. The wind had changed. It came in sharper that morning, thin, slicing through the barnwood like a blade. Sadie stood by the doorway of the small guest room, her canvas bag already tied shut. It didn't take long to pack. There was never much, just an extra shirt, her mother's old handkerchief folded with careful reverence, and the hat Calder had given her that first week she arrived. The brim was bent now, the fabric faded and stained by days spent under the sun and nights by the fire. But she folded it slowly, the way one folds something worth remembering. Her boots didn't make a sound as she stepped into the kitchen. The house was still. On the table she placed a single folded sheet of paper. She had written it 3 times, once in anger, once in sorrow, and finally, in silence. The ink had dried before her hand stopped trembling. "You owe me nothing. I do not want to ruin whatever life you still have left, Sadie." She lingered in the doorway, letting her eyes pass over the room. The chair where Calder always sat when polishing his rifle. The quiet hearth that still smelled faintly of pine. The shelf with the ledger he updated every Thursday like clockwork. She let her gaze fall on the small kitchen window, the one with the creaking hinge that never quite shut tight. It all seemed too still, like it knew she wasn't coming back. Outside, the sky had turned iron gray. By the time Calder returned from the west fields, the wind had teeth. He pushed the door open, boots heavy with frost and mud, brushing snow from his coat. His voice rose instinctively. "Sadie?" Silence. Then he saw the note. He read it once, then again. The words sank in like frost into exposed skin. He didn't sit down. He didn't even take off his gloves. He grabbed his coat, threw his saddle over the gelding's back, and rode like the ground behind him was breaking apart. Snow lashed at his face as he galloped through the hills, calling her name into the rising storm. His voice barely echoed. The barn, empty. The storage cabin, locked. The old smokehouse, cold and abandoned. Then he saw it. The half-collapsed shed by the creek. Long forgotten, once used for hay before it sagged in the middle. He dismounted and nearly slipped in the snow as he rushed to the door. Inside, it was darker than he remembered, and colder. She was there, curled up in the corner, like the world had cornered her back, her bag clutched to her chest, her lips pale, her eyes dull and barely open. "Sadie," he breathed, falling to his knees beside her. She blinked slowly. "I didn't want you to come." He didn't answer, just stripped off his coat and wrapped it around her shaking form. Too late. She shivered. "I didn't want to be the reason they stop respecting you." He gently touched her cheek, moving a frozen strand of hair from her face. "If you've never had a home." His voice was quiet, steady. "Let me be your roof, Sadie. Let me be your shelter." Her breath hitched in her throat. He didn't kiss her. He didn't ask her to stay. He just held her tighter, arms forming a barrier between her and the world. And as the wind roared around them, they stayed, 2 souls, unspoken promises, one flame of warmth in a broken, snowbound shed. Spring came gently to the valley, as if the land itself was exhaling after a long, bitter breath. The snow had melted weeks ago, leaving behind wildflowers that scattered across the hills like forgotten confetti. Under the wide oak near the edge of the pasture, Calder Northwood adjusted the sleeves of his dark vest, brushing invisible dust from his shoulder. His hair was combed back, boots polished. He was not used to crowds, certainly not to being watched. But today, the weight of eyes did not bother him. Sadie walked toward him from the house. Her dress was simple, made from soft linen she'd sewn by hand over winter. Her shoes were worn but clean, her hair woven with sprigs of lavender and yarrow. She did not carry a bouquet. Instead, she walked with both hands open, as if ready to catch whatever the day offered. They met beneath the oak tree. No preacher, no book of vows. Only two people who had already spoken everything important through firelight, silence, and survival. Calder took her hands. "You came a long way for someone who did not plan to stay." Sadie smiled. "I stopped running the moment you gave me a roof I didn't have to hide under." From a distance, neighbors watched. Many of them had once whispered about the girl from nowhere who lived with Calder Northwood. Some had urged him to be cautious, some had turned their backs. But they were here now. Not out of curiosity, but respect. Mrs. Harland, the baker's wife, held her husband's hand and whispered, "She's not what they said. I saw her fix a broken fence post near the schoolhouse last week. Didn't even ask for anything." Calder and Sadie did not hear them. They only heard the wind through the grass, the steady sound of two hearts still learning to rest in rhythm. After a quiet exchange of promises, no grand declarations, just truths forged in the forge of hardship, they turned to face the field. Two horses waited, already saddled. Calder helped Sadie up, then mounted beside her. Side by side, they rode through the field, sunlight painting their backs gold, hooves pressing softly into damp earth. Sadie looked at the sky, squinting into the light. "I used to sleep under rusted tin, praying it wouldn't fall in," she said softly. Calder glanced over, quiet. "But now," she continued, voice steady, "I live beneath a sky I chose. And beneath that vast, open blue, where once there had been nothing but running, two souls rode forward, unchained, together. If your heart was stirred by this tale of love born in the cold wind, mended fences, and the wide open skies of the West, then go ahead and hit that hype button to share the emotion with others who believe in second chances. And if you're drawn to cinematic love stories full of soul, grit, and the unexpected, be sure to subscribe to the Wild West Love Stories channel today. Every follow helps keep stories like Sadie and Calder's alive, stories of healing, honor, and home. We'll see you in the next love story, partner.